Request for bill introductions. Paul Finney, would you like to make your request? Welcome to the Tax Committee. No, turn your mic on, please. Thank you.
Madam Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Paul Finney from Humboldt. I request introduction of a bill dealing with a tax loss carrybacks problem that was created by the tax bill of 2012. Yes, and the RX number is 23RS0626.
Thank you, Paul. Committee, any questions? Any objection to the introduction? Seeing none, we'll make the request. Thank you, Paul.
And that makes it a committee bill.
It does.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Clays, welcome to the Tax Committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a bill relating to a Dickinson County city and county-wide retailer sales tax that I'm introducing on behalf of the constituents of mine in Dickinson County. It is 23 RS0478.
Are there any questions on the bill request? Seeing none, any objection? We'll make the request. Committee, I do have a bill request of my own. I left my note downstairs though, committee. I'm working on too many pieces of legislation. I will wait and make that introduction next week. Thank you, committee. Committee, let's go ahead and get started with the agenda. We do have a full schedule again today. I am going to announce that I have been requested not to work any bills this week, and so we won't have time anyway today. But I just wanted to make that clear. I thought I had made that announcement yesterday. Senator Baumgardner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Before we begin our hearing on Senate Bill 8, I would like a point of personal privilege before he has to leave for his tour.
No, that's fine. Senator Baumgardner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's that time of the year. We're starting to have pages here. And so I'd like to introduce my page, JJ Dice. Stand up and be embarrassed in front of this group of adults. Yes. JJ is not only a great student, but he is a student at St. James Academy, and we're just happy to have him with us. Thank you.
Welcome, JJ, and it looks like your father is with you. So welcome to the Tax Committee. Thank you. Committee will go ahead and start the hearing on Senate Bill 8. Amelia, would you give us an overview, please?
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Senate Bill number 8 relates to property tax and specifically relates to personal property tax. The bill would reduce the penalties that are currently charged for the late filing of and the failure to file personal property statements of assessments or renditions, and for the discovery of escaped personal property. Currently, under the current law, every person who holds or owns taxable tangible personal property in the state is required to annually file an annual personal property statement assessment form. Sometimes you may hear it referred to as a rendition. They are required to file that with the county appraiser on or before March 15 each year. Owners of oil and gas leases or operators of oil and gas are required to file their statement of rendition or their statement of assessment or rendition on or before April 1st each year. There are penalties in statute if those forms are not filed in a timely fashion or are not filed at all. So this particular bill addresses those 3 statutes that cover that topic. Specifically, if the forms are not timely filed, in these 3 statutes, the general rule is that there's a 5% penalty per month that those filings are late, but that should not exceed 25%. There is also a penalty if the form is not filed within 1 year from its due date. That penalty is 50%. And if the county appraiser discovers tangible taxable personal property that has not been reported, that's considered escaped property. And again, the penalty is 50%. So Section 1 of this particular bill starts with an oil and gas statute that addresses those penalties. It would amend this statute 793332A, and it would reduce the monthly penalty from 5% to 2%. The maximum late filing penalty would be amended from 25% to 10%. And then the failure to file penalty would be reduced from 50% to 12.5%. Section 2 of the bill is a statute, KSA 791422, relating to penalties generally for personal property statements. Again, this would reduce monthly penalties from 5% to 2%, the maximum late filing penalty from 25 to 10%, and reduce the failure to file penalty from 50% to 12.5%. Section 3 of the bill would amend KSA 791427A to reduce what is referred to as the escaped personal property penalty. It would reduce it from 50% to 12.5%. And the bill would take effect from and after publication in the statute book, and I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, Amelia. I do have a question. When the penalties are paid, does it go to the local government?
I believe so.
Would you mind
There's
checking
a-
on that and confirming for us?
Certainly.
I always have heartburn over the group, whomever it may be, collecting a penalty, benefiting from the penalty. But I'm just curious if we could look at that. Committee, any other questions for Amelia? Seeing none, thank you. Committee, our first conferee is Senator Mark Steffen, and I will thank Senator Steffen for bringing us this legislation.
Thank you. Mark Steffen, State Senate District 34. The good news is I think it's incredibly unlikely that you'll see me again in this position this year, so hold your applause. But yeah, Senate Bill 8, exactly as Amelia described, we're looking at the penalties, trying to bring them down to a more reasonable level. Penalizing people is really not a strategic way to raise taxes. Personal property taxes, a funny little form that has a due date of March 15th that does a date that doesn't really correspond with much else in our tax system. In calling my appraiser, and the appraisers in my district, I found that a third of these sheets are returned late and develop penalties, a third of them. So it's clearly a component of this is a failure to communicate. And so when you look at a penalty, and a third of these having penalties contributed to them, you say, why? What are the reasons people would do this? Number one, just forgetting to send it in, losing it, just accidentally. Number two, using it as a source to finance their debt. And third is just cheating. Well, yeah, accidentally forgetting to get this filed shouldn't occur a 5% penalty a month. That is onerous. When you look at that, when you analyze the 5%, what I did was I took an ultra short cash reserves account at Fidelity right now is paying like after management fees probably towards 3.5%. This 5% compared to the 3%, which really on a monthly basis goes down to like 0.29, 0.39%. It's 17 times the interest rate you would be drawing in a Fidelity cash account. Until the last 6 months when the interest rates moved up, I would put forth that this penalty was up to 100 times more than they could have made with keeping the money in a cash-bearing account. So it truly is an inappropriate amount of money to be penalizing people for. Bottom line, I think we have a failure to communicate between appraisers and the people paying these taxes. I think the first step to alleviating the discomfort of this penalty is to decrease it and bring it to the forefront, let people see what other issues can be done to spiff this up to where collection's easier, fairer, more straightforward. And I do want to introduce some very, very dear friends of mine who are from my district, John and Amy Brennan, who are here today. And I'm very grateful for their friendship, and I'm grateful for their willingness to come up and testify. As they epitomize the individuals that get caught in this trap unwittingly, and I think you'll benefit from hearing from them. I appreciate your time, and I appreciate your consideration of the bill. Thank you.
Would you stand for questions, please?
Sure, you bet.
Thank you. Committee, any questions? Senator Baumgardner.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for being here, Senator. 2 questions. I'm looking at to reduce the failure to file penalty from 50% to 12.5. How did you come up with that 12.5?
Again, 12.5% over the course of a year is many multiples more than what you could finance it at. To some degree, it was an arbitrary decision. I won't deny that. And
So it could be changed to 10%?
Sure
Easier to
could.
calculate?
Sure could.
Okay, the other question that I have, and I'm not sure if this is true in Reno County, in Miami County, if you go to pay a property tax, if you physically go to pay it, you're charged a fee rather than to mail it. I'm assuming that they would have to calculate what was owed on these penalties. So in Reno, is there a fee to physically go and get it calculated, or would they be billed?
I don't know the answer to that. I know they go down, they prorate a month even. If you're late 5 days into a month, they're going to charge, ultimately, they're charging you a penalty by the day. But as far as actually doing it in person, I don't know the answer to that.
Well, it just seems to me if they're going to prorate, Madam Chair, or if they're going to charge a fee to physically calculate, I think we want to make sure that there's not an additional fee for that calculation or for you to physically be there to make that payment. Would you see that as a friendly amendment?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you.
Thank you, Senator Baumgardner. I think those will be good improvements to the legislation. We might have a few others too, if this good senator doesn't mind. Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Senator, for being here. I'm absolutely in favor of anything that relieves tax burden on our Kansans. But my question is, you mentioned several times that what we have here is a failure to communicate. So my question is, how does lowering a rate alleviate the problem of the communication? So is there a plan to help that communication so we don't have any penalties, whether low or high?
Well, my plan to stimulate that conversation, to alleviate that failure to communicate, is to decrease the penalty, which will get the attention of the appraisers and have them relook at the system.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And Senator, I have found a bank in Enterprise, a small one that has CDs at 4.5%, so you may want to shop around. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Senator Holland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Stephan, thanks for being here this morning. So I have a number of questions. I want to be sure I understand the possible implications. This is basically trying to address 2 things, correct? It's basically for people who own this type of personal property, if they are late in making payments, you're trying to reduce the penalty they have to make by not making their tax payments on time. Is that correct?
Well, I am taking the stance that the penalty currently in statute is inappropriately high.
Okay, and the second question I want to ask you is, but there's a second piece of this too, right? Because if we talk about, what is it, the property renditions, is this basically a separate document that's being filed? Is this trying to keep the county's property tax rolls up to date as far as the status, the valuation of that property? What is the rendition? Or is that tied to the payment?
Well, the kind of property that falls into these sheets for average people is like livestock trailers, horse trailers, a 4-wheeler, some odds and ends type of.
So does that mean like getting it registered in the first place?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to
Yeah,
that.
so I'd like to know as far as what's the, I mean, okay, so then I have some other questions, I guess, and this is a couple more questions, and I'll ask Eddie for a request, Madam Chair, on research. I guess here's my question. I'm assuming this equipment, this personal property, I mean, this is worth some significant dollars, correct?
Some is, some isn't. It can become very, very low value.
Okay, but most of this is related to ag or other commercial businesses executing and running of a business, right?
Well, I can
If I
give,
may, I'm going to step in a little bit. We'll give these questions to Eddie, but it is actual other products too. It's golf carts, it's several personal property items,
Okay.
not just ag.
And I will, looks like we need to move on. So, but here's my point is that, to me, this exacerbates the problem. And quite honestly, I don't see, particularly if you have equipment that is worth several dollars, okay, how you're going to perpetually forget, okay, to either basically file the appropriate notices to the county appraiser, okay, or pay your taxes. To me, you're just exacerbating the problem because now you're giving financial incentive for people not to pay their taxes. So my request, I'll just leave it at that. Madam Chair, my request for Eddie would be is that I would like to know the delinquency of these types of payments going on in the counties. And quite honestly, I think your bill should maybe consider instead maybe having the appraiser maybe provide some leeway on an individual basis. But to me, you're really opening up a can of worms here and basically further hurting, I guess to me, the tax base of these, particularly these rural counties. And I'll just leave it at
So,
that. Thank you.
Senator, I'm going to let you respond, but I am going to make a request of Eddie. If you would bring to the committee the process on this and how it works, because I think there's a big misunderstanding. And we actually dealt with this issue a little bit last year. When you would sell personal property previously, you owed the property, whether you sold it in January or February, you owed the taxes on it for the entire year. We dealt with that last year, so I appreciate the good senator bringing and talking on this topic, and if you would like to respond, please.
well, two things real briefly. Number one, this gets down to such minutia. I have an old wheat truck that hasn't ran in 3 years that shows up on this personal property tax list year after year. Secondly, it's really what your viewpoint is. And I saw a little variation in viewpoint there. Do you trust the boss, who is the taxpayer? Do you trust them, or are you going to penalize them? Do you believe that they're inherently looking to cheat on their taxes? Which viewpoint do you want to take a look at on this? I look at this as the taxpayer deserves the benefit of the doubt, not the government.
And if I may, I just want to clarify that this is about the filing of the form that the penalty is on, not the late payment of the taxes. That's different. So we may need to look at that also in the bill to make sure that we've got I think the senator's concern is about late payments, but this is actually about filing the form. So Senator.
Yeah, no, so just real quick response, Senator, I live by the motto, trust but verify. And number two, I just want to be sure that we are not exacerbating bad behaviors, because we do this for this particular group of property. Everybody else is going to say, well, I've got the same issues. Why are we showing preference for this particular piece of personal property? So that's why I want to understand. And thank you for bringing the issue to our attention.
Would you like to respond?
I appreciate Senator Holland's viewpoints every time I hear them. I'm grateful for him being here.
Thank you. Committee,
you.
any other questions for Senator Erickson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate your indulgence. And Senator, I'd just like to simplify this. I think it's ridiculous that we pay any tax on personal property. So appreciate you trying to make it easier. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. So committee, we are short on time again today, of course. Next conferee is John Brennan. Welcome to the Tax Committee.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you for allowing me to offer my testimony this morning in support of Senate Bill 8. My wife and I drove up this morning from south of Hutchinson. We live on a rural property there, 40 acres. I'm going to deviate from my written testimony a little bit in to respect the time frame here and just get right to it. So several years ago, we got in the mail what is called a property worksheet. Our county clerk's office sends this to every person who pays or has personal property. I got it and filed it, forgot to send it back for a whole year. So the next sheet you get should be the notice of valuation of the property that you've declared. This allows you to rectify, add property, take away property. Matter of fact, we just sold a trailer about 2 months ago. I took this bill of sale to my clerk's office, or the appraiser's office. We did get the tax notice. That is now off. We do not own it anymore, so that came off. So that is part of that process. When we did not send that paperwork back in, and we got our next tax bill, which was in December for first half property tax, personal property tax, that bill, had we paid it on time or filed the form on time, it would have been $1,000. We have a horse trailer and a 20-foot flatbed trailer at the time. When we got the bill, it was $1,500. So we did not file. I am all for paying property tax and give the state its due. That's fine, personal property. But when I got the $1,500 bill, I, of course, went right to the appraiser's office, and I said, I don't quite understand what's going on. We don't want to buy another trailer. We just will pay the tax on it. And, of course, that was when we were enlightened. My mistake. It was I just didn't get it done. So from then on, my wife and I obviously were paying attention, addressing some of your questions, Senator. Yes, it caught our attention, a 50% penalty of the total amount of tax we owed on those trailers. Yes, it got my attention. So 3 years later or 4 years later, we got this. I actually sent it in. We do it every year now. Matter of fact, 2 days ago, I hand-delivered this valuation or declaration of what we own to the appraiser's office. But a few years later, they never got our form. And so I went up there and I said, I actually had called them. It's due March 15th. Called the appraiser's office probably in early April. Did you get the form? And they said no. So I went up there. Long story short, they did. They said, look, we don't have your form. I said, I mailed it. They said, we believe you, but you did not follow the rules that the state statute requires. I said, what do we do about it? They basically reduced the penalty by whatever it was. I don't actually remember what it was, but we did not pay the $500. I don't know, it was $50, $100 more, whatever it was. So I appreciate Senator Stephan inviting me to testify on behalf of support of SB 8. We're not against paying the property tax on this personal property, but this, in my opinion, having lived through it, having gone through the process, is excessive. It is punitive. It is ridiculous. I do believe that the most of that penalty money does stay with your local municipality and county government and funds some of their projects, whatever they may be. The clerk or the appraiser office did tell me this week, not every county does it the same way. There are some counties in Kansas that don't even mail the valuation notice. You are completely on your own to go to the appraiser's office to declare your property. I still don't understand, if I don't make any kind of movement on a property that I own, a personal property item that I own, why do I even need to fill out a form? Wouldn't it be assumed that I just own the property and send me the bill? And there should not be any kind of penalty involved in that at all? And then fine, send me the valuation or the tax that's due and I will pay it. So not at all against paying the property tax. That's how we run our government. I think it's fine. I'm not even opposed to a penalty. And I agree with you. Perhaps this could cause lax. And we know there's people who just want to beat the system, and I understand that. But at the same time, I personally don't think it's fair. I don't think it's right. My wife and I could afford to pay it. So I think you get my point here. Obviously, I'm in support of this bill. I certainly appreciate the amendments or some of the conversation to make it an even better bill. And I thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you. Senator Holland.
Sir, thank you for being here. Please know I am a small business owner like yourself, and I am paper-driven. And quite honestly, if somebody doesn't send me something to tell them to pay them, it's out of sight, out of mind. So let me posit this to you. Would it be appropriate as an alternative solution? Would it be appropriate that basically anytime a county is issuing a notice for payment or something, number one, if you're late in paying it, that they be required to basically send you a follow-up reminder that, hey, you still haven't responded to this. And then what if we also gave the county assessor's office then the leeway to handle individual cases where, I mean, obviously, they recognized the issue you had. And so you weren't still totally happy with the outcome, but at least they worked to reduce. What I'm wondering is that, can we put some customer service things in place here to make it a better experience with the tax folks in your county? So they're more responsive to you, they're more mindful to you, and give them the ability to address one-off situations. Would that be an appropriate solution to this problem?
I think that would be part of an appropriate solution to this problem. Of course, the whole purpose of the bill is to reduce the 50% penalty. That's the essence of it. And of course, as Senator Stephan said, we're pretty much in agreement with you, perhaps this failure to communicate. Now, I will admit, it says right on this form, if you read the fine print, if you don't do this, you're going to be penalized up to 50%. So there is a failure on my part to read it and follow through. But again, I think it's punitive. But yes, anything besides what the current law says or statute says to improve this would certainly be better, sure.
Thank you. Committee, any other questions? Thank you for your testimony.
Yeah, thank you.
Next up, we have Martha Stewart. Would you like to has you as, oh, Stewart. You guys, it really is.
Craft.
Make us some cookies, please.
You guys.
Maybe tomorrow I could bring in some crafts and cookies for y'all.
Yeah, I can say a true blonde moment. Yes.
It's Martha Smith with Kansas Manufactured Housing. That's not the first time I've been called Martha Stewart, but not for my cooking. So we are probably some of those odds and ends that are included in the personal property. Personal property manufactured homes are required. The homeowners are required. And just like you heard the first constituent say, they get it, they think they filed it once, they don't need to file it again, so they don't. Sometimes they just file it away. So we do reminders to our members to remind their residents, but it's still difficult for them to understand.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Martha. Would you stand for questions if there's any?
Sorry.
Committee, any questions? Thank you, Martha Stewart. Martha Smith, yeah. Randy Stuckey.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. This is my first time before the committee this year, so thank you for the opportunity to testify on this bill. Randy Stuckey, this morning on behalf of the Kansas Grain and Feed Association, the grain elevators of the state of Kansas, and the Renew Kansas Biofuels Association. So on behalf of both those associations, I'd like to present a little bit of testimony, a little bit of different look at this bill this morning. So we do agree. We're a proponent of the underlying bill. It makes sense for us. We got caught up in this situation a little bit differently, though. For our members, the issue is not scofflaw or lack of just throwing this statement away and not paying the bill. The issue is a little more in depth. And it's the fact of the matter is that for decades now, in both the grain elevator industry and the biofuels industry, we have fought the issue of the proper classification of our machinery and equipment. Our position is that this, using the three-part fixtures test of Kansas law, we should be appropriately, our machinery and equipment should be appropriately classified as personal property, not as fixtures of the realty. That's important because look at my written testimony, you'll see that in this summer, the Kansas Court of Appeals, no less than the Kansas Court of Appeals, found for the Kansas grain elevator industry that, in fact, our machinery and equipment should be properly classified as personal property, not as fixtures of the realty. This is not a small issue. It's not a small issue in this case because you would not have filed a personal property rendition for property in March of last year if your county appraiser or if our friends at the Property Valuation Division give guidance to the county appraisers that this should be then classified as real property. You wouldn't have filed that document, and we didn't. But what's going to happen this year after the July Court of Appeals decision, this last December, when you have to file that, pay your taxes, we will have paid under protest, likely an entire industry will have paid under protest for misclassification of our machinery and equipment. And this matters in the value, how it's valued. And so what you're going to have, because the current status of the law as you've stated, Senator, the appeal process, you don't have discretion by the county appraiser. You have to appeal to the Board of Tax Appeals. Can you imagine the amount of appeals that are going to go before the Board of Tax Appeals this year on this issue? So we appreciate the underlying bill, which simply reduces the penalty. Look, we're not scofflaws. We don't need a removal of the penalty or reduction of the penalty so much. I think it's unreasonable when you look at the fiscal note to this bill that the counties are collecting that much on late fees. But that's a side point. Our main point is that, look, if the county appraisers have the authority to, for good cause, waive this penalty, and here, we would like to amend the bill, respectfully request to amend the bill to where it says here the Board of Tax Appeals may waive the penalty for good cause. We would suggest two things. Allow the county appraiser for good cause to waive this penalty. It just makes sense procedurally. And then secondly, in cases like this, where your machinery equipment was by the Court of Appeals, by the Board of Tax Appeals even, classified as real property before, and you wouldn't have had notice to file a personal property rendition, then that should be good cause in the statute that that penalty should be waived. I think that's a clear and reasonable amendment to, and for us, necessary for the process. Amendment to this bill, which on the face of it, again, is a good bill. I think the counties are probably over collecting it shouldn't be a penalty to fund the government services, but also for the purposes that I just spoke to, allow the county appraisers for good cause to waive this penalty, and then also in certain circumstances, such as ours, specifically set out to have that a mandatory waiver of any penalty. Madam Chair, that's the whole and part of my testimony. I certainly stand for any questions for clarification.
Thank you, Randy. Committee, any questions? Senator Peck.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I appreciate you bringing this to the committee's attention because it's certainly something that should be addressed. I do have a question because you provided in your testimony a proposed amendment. In the blue language, the date of January the 1st, 2022 is listed. Can you explain to the committee why the date of January 1, 2022 rather than 23 or 21 or?
Sure. So like I said, the Kansas Court of Appeals decision was this July. And so the payment under protest for our industry would be this December. This would be a look back to allow for this last 2022 tax season. If they were to pay under protest, we wouldn't run into this. It would be a mandatory waiver for 2022.
Senator Peck.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So the decision, the appellate court decision was for taxes from 22, is that correct?
Well, in the specific case of the Dodge City Co-op, it was the appeal from tax year 2015, well, in 15 for 13 and 14. So it took 7 years to get from the initial informal appeal, Board of Tax Appeals, District Court, and Kansas Court of Appeals. So they are now talking about all of the payment under protest for every year from 15 to 22 in that case. But in going forward broadly, it would be the 2022 would be a waiver.
Senator Peck.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Then Senator Holland and, yeah.
Briefly, one more. So would backing up the date be beneficial, or you just believe that 22 is the proper date?
Certainly be beneficial for our industry because they think they've been paying taxes wrongly, and they have been for the last however many years.
That's my.
But in good faith, I just gave 1 year of the reprieve.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Holland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So Randy, just real quick, and then there's a disconnect from me in here. I want to be sure I understand. So this ruling by the appellate court or whatever, is this your members that paid under protest, is this going to allow them to go back in history and get refunds, or is just going forward, it's going to be on the new classification, so we won't be subject to this penalty going forward?
Well, certainly the going forward, and then with the January 1 of 2022 for 2022, and I will admit I'm familiar with these waters. I don't swim in them daily. I'm not a tax practitioner, so I would have to defer to maybe PVD or one of our friends.
So I guess my only point is that it would seem to me that as long as this legislation gave the county assessor the freedom to waive these penalties, quite honestly, I don't think we want to use this as a vehicle for you to rectify your penalty to protest situation. It seems to me that the Department of Revenue would issue guidance to the counties, okay, and then they will come up with some sort of scheme at some point for, if there's a mass filing of lawsuits wherever to get their, folks get their money back, it seems to me that would be handled separately. I don't think that should be handled as part of this process or color our discussion as far as what's an appropriate penalty amount, because I think it's out of context.
Well, actually, it's not, because my proposed amendment would only be limited to, it would speak to the penalty, not the actual property tax itself. So this is focused specifically on mandatory waiver of that penalty under these circumstances, not the property tax itself.
Can't that be handled outside of this legislation because of the court case?
Senator, we're not debating the bill. If you have a suggested amendment in question, that would be fine. Okay, committee, any other questions? We do have 2 other hearings today, so thank you, Randy.
Thank you very much.
Yes. Committee, I'll draw your attention to written testimony in favor of the bill. Proponent Mark Clower, Aaron Papalka, and Shahira Stafford. I butchered her name again, too. Eric can correct that later. So, committee, is there any other proponents for the bill? Seeing none. Opponents? Seeing none. Neutral testimony? There is none. Committee will close the hearing on Senate Bill 8. And a gentle reminder to everyone that testimony is due 24 hours prior to the committee hearing. John works very hard to get these in the packet. I would just appreciate that we respect his time and get testimony turned in for anybody that wants to testify, as we do want to hear from everybody. Amelia, would you give us an overview on Senate Bill 40? Senate Bill 8 was new to this committee. Senate Bill 40 and Senate Bill 41, the next 2 bills, this committee has seen a couple of times. So thank you, Amelia.
Yes, good morning again, Madam Chairperson and members of the committee. Senate Bill number 40 relates to Kansas adjusted gross income and would provide a subtraction modification to allow the carry forward of certain net operating losses for individuals. If you are looking in your Senate bill for the actual language of this new provision, you will find it on page 10. The bill would amend KSA 7932-117 subsection C to allow the subtraction from federal adjusted gross income for taxable years beginning after December 31st of 2017 for an individual taxpayer who carried back federal net operating losses that arose in taxable years 18, 19, and 20 pursuant to the Internal Revenue Code, Section 172B1, as it was amended by the CARES Act. That amount of such federal net operating, the amount of such net operating loss carryback for each applicable year is the carry forward. If the amount of such net operating loss carryback exceeds the taxpayer's Kansas adjusted gross income for the taxable year, that amount that exceeds their tax may be carried forward as a subtraction modification in following years. There is a limit to a 20-year carry forward. And in this particular bill, which is slightly different from last year, if you're comparing the two, there is an extension of time allowed here to file amended tax returns on this particular topic.
Thank you. And just for clarification, that inclusion of the language allowing them to file amended returns is because of the restriction in current statute, correct? So, thank you. Committee, any questions for Amelia? Senator Holland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So Amelia, just real quick, it looks like the Senate bill that went to law last year was addressing this on a go-forward basis. And is this just the retroactive piece of that to do a look back a number of years, or is this something different?
The main provision that is being proposed here in this bill is the same language that was in last session's bill, I believe, if I'm thinking of the correct bill. And you saw that language again, possibly in a CCR. Yeah, House Bill 2597, same language. The only change in this provision is allowing some additional time if they need to file amended returns for tax years 18, 19, and 20, because we are beyond the statute of limitations for amended returns at this point for those tax years. So it's giving additional time to, if it applies.
This just allows the look back. Basically allows them to initial time to find. Thank you.
It does. Any other questions, committee? Seeing none, thank you, Amelia. Our first conferee committee is Dan Murray. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dan Murray, Kansas State Director for the National Federation of Independent Business. I think I'll generally stand on my written testimony, but we stand in support of this bill as well explained and questioned by Senator Holland as well. This really just is, I view as a kind of technical fix to what was passed last year. I think Senate Bill 543 was the original version and then was put into House substitute for another, Senate substitute for another House bill that I have in my testimony. I think it's, in my view, a cleanup of what we did last year and would appreciate your support.
Thank you, Dan. Is there any questions from the committee? Senator Baumgardner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dan, did you see the expenditure from our Director of Budget, what the state anticipates?
Senator, you're referring to the fiscal note attached to this? I did not. I'm sorry.
They're indicating about $93,000 to just implement this. Is that similar to what it was? This has been introduced before?
You ask a very good question, Senator. I'm sorry I don't have that answer. I would imagine the processes internally would be
Dan,
available, but I would defer to the chair.
I'll save you on that one. We'll ask that question of research, Eddie, so he can get that. He'll email it to the committee. Thank you. Thank you.
Bailed me out.
Pardon?
You bailed me out there.
Glad to help.
Thank you.
Yes. I do have a quick question. I think this look back is very interesting, but one of them that's never been included are the small businesses that had to pay state income tax on their losses from the 2012, 2017. Would you be supportive of the look back on that also?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yep. The next conferee is Kevin Accord on WebEx. Kevin, are you with us?
I am. Can you hear me?
I can. Welcome to the Tax Committee.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so my name's Kevin Accord. I'm a CPA and attorney. I practice in Lenexa, Kansas. I've been practicing in the tax world since 1980. That just makes me old. But really, Senate Bill 40, this is something that I brought to Karen's attention last year. Is just this. All this is to me a fundamental fairness question. If you go back in history, Kansas used to decouple Kansas net operating losses from federal net operating losses. That changed with the repeal of what I'll call the Brownback tax amendments. And to simplify it, Kansas just followed the federal net operating loss rules. However, Kansas does not allow for loss carrybacks. So when the CARES Act implemented this 5-year carryback for losses incurred in 18, 19, and 20, for federal purposes, there's no fix for Kansas. So if you have a Kansas taxpayer that did carry it back, in essence, if this fix does not occur, then these people are really fundamentally being treated unfairly. Because without the CARES Act, there's no question that these losses would have been available for Kansas purposes. Again, I just think this is really just a fundamental fairness question. With respect to the fiscal questions on this, I don't really understand why there's any fiscal question. We're just fixing something that should have never been an issue to begin with.
Thank you, Kevin. Committee, do you have any questions? So I would just like to clarify, all this is doing is trying to get a tax refund for individuals that were required to pay state income tax on their losses. Would you, that may be oversimplifying it, but would you agree with that, Kevin?
Yeah, I think it probably oversimplifies it. I think in many cases, if somebody has a large loss and they carried it back in those years, then they may not be able to utilize that loss, in the succeeding years, but they have 20 years to use that up. So you could have refunds. You could have a situation where it's the Kansas net operating loss is just carried forward and
Okay,
utilized in future years.
okay, great. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.
Committee, we don't have any other proponents for the bill. Any opponents of the bill? Seeing none, any neutral on the bill? Seeing none, we'll close the hearing on Senate Bill 40. We're going to quickly open the hearing on Senate Bill 41. Committee, Amelia, will you give us an overview?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, Senate Bill number 41 relates to sales and compensating use tax and would provide a remittance credit to retailers in an amount equal to 1.5% of such remittance. The total credit amount for each month shall not exceed $300 for each retailer, and the bill would take effect from and after publication in the statute book. And this, again, is you may recall seeing this last year. I believe it was Senate Bill 463. I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, Amelia. Committee, any questions? Seeing none, thank you. Kevin Gregg from Fuel Time, welcome to the Tax Committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Kevin Gregg. I represent Fuel True Independent Energy and Convenience, which is formerly the Petroleum Marketers and Convenience Store Association of Kansas. We are in support of this bill because we do collect the sales tax, and it's my understanding and confirmed by staff that it would be up to $300, so a $3,600 credit per year. So when our retailers collect this tax, we're certainly in support of it and appreciate the committee's recognition of our job as a tax collecting arm of the state to give us a little bit of return for the efforts that we make to collect this tax in all of our convenience stores and retailers throughout the state. So we're in support of the bill, and I'd stand for any questions.
Thank you. Committee, any questions? Seeing none, thank you. Dan Murray, welcome back.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Dan Murray, again, Kansas State Director for the National Federation of Independent Business. We represent about 4,000 members across Kansas. I didn't mention that before. Hopefully, those of you on this committee have heard from me before and know that. We have hundreds of small retailers. Most of our members are 10 and below employees. They're the ones that shoulder a disproportionate burden of frankly, serving as a taxman for the state of Kansas and cities and counties. There is a cost related and associated to collecting and remitting these taxes to the state. And similarly, I believe in certain state agency perspectives, they're able to retain some of the fees that they collect and remit to the Department of Administration or transfer to the federal government. And so what's good for the goose ought to be good for the gander, but truly it comes down to the onerous burden of collecting and remitting this, particularly for our smallest retailers. And in my testimony, and you probably can't click on a paper, but in the PDF, there's a link to a study by the Department of Revenue in the state of Washington that reflects that disproportionate cost for small businesses in particular. I do mention in my testimony we'd love to have a higher cap than $300 a month. I think that probably falls in the range that is reasonable for sure, and we are cognizant of the fiscal tightrope that you as taxers, but also budget makers have to walk. So we appreciate the effort that you made.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
Committee, any questions? Senator Peck.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Murray, you indicated that you would like to see the amount higher. So apparently you're saying that 300 does not cover the administrative and the accounting cost of remitting the sales tax collections.
Senator, it varies from retailer to retailer, so it's hard to pinpoint an exact amount. I think starting with something is a positive step forward. Our neighboring states, I think, including all of our surrounding neighboring states, allow for some retailer retention. So this at least gets us on board, moving in the right direction.
If you picked a number, what would that number be that's not 300?
$1 million, no. I wish I could give you a definitive amount. Candidly, it's hard to throw a dart and pick a number. There probably are some industry standards out there that say this costs this much for a retailer that has, X amount of transactions versus a retailer that has this. There's scale that changes between a Walmart and a small convenience store. So it's different. It's hard to predict. That study that is linked is a few years old, but it does provide some perspective on that cost that I would refer you to. And I don't have an exact amount I could give you at this point, but.
I was clicking on my paper and it didn't.
Yeah, it didn't go.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
But again, I say that in my testimony. I also want to just emphasize, we appreciate the effort that this bill provides and makes, and we fully endorse it and support it, so.
Thank you. Senator Holland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess just some research requests for Eddie and just a comment. I'm much more concerned about the burden on small businesses versus the Walmarts or the chains of Kansas, quite honestly. And so, Eddie, my research request would be, is that number one, how are other states who are doing some sort of a relief for sales tax, how do they do it? And I also want some figures on, based upon the percentage of what would be the give back, what are we really talking about putting in the hands of the smaller revenue dollar owners? Because I want to be sure we have a cost of compliance here as well to weigh on the other side of this is how does Department of Revenue ensure this stuff is still being reported accurately? So if you get me some data on us on the states and how they do it and their compensation schemes, that'd be helpful. Thank you.
Eddie, is that okay?
Yeah, I'll have to work with the Department of Revenue in terms of how we can split this out on large versus small retailers, but we'll come up with something for you.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Senator Reddy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is, in the fiscal note, in the third paragraph, I believe, it says Senate Bill 41 would decrease retail sales and compensating use tax collections by $57 million. So is that my understanding that would be an annual reduction of that much by giving $300 to each business?
That's what the Department of Revenue has estimated it to be.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Dan.
And Chairman, I would just refer Senator Holland to the link in my testimony online to that study. It does show the percentage, kind of disproportionate percentage that small business retailers pay versus the larger retailers, again, as a matter of scale. But certainly all retailers experience a burden and cost for collecting and remitting.
Our next conferee is going to speak to that a little bit, if he has time.
Thank you very much for
Thank you, Dan. Scott Schneider, welcome to the Tax Committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Scott Schneider on behalf of the Kansas Restaurant and Hospitality Association. We did come before this committee last year and support the similar measure. In my written testimony, you don't have to click the link. It does have the Washington State data, which is fascinating because it does show the disproportionate cost. The smaller you are, the more complex it is to collect taxes. It's just a scale issue. We think there is a justification, especially with the passing of the food sales tax reduction, the complexity that has created in our industry, the difference of how you can sell a muffin with a fork, without a fork, at the counter, delivery, takeout, or it really is complex now. The Department of Revenue put out a 26-page guideline of how to collect that tax. I can't imagine what that algorithm looks like. But the feedback that I got from industry members is after you've purchased your point-of-sale system, if you had to adjust it, it's $100 an hour bare minimum to come in and fix that. So there's this cost that has to go into making sure that we can collect taxes for the state of Kansas. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott, and thank you for the data. That was very helpful. Committee, any other questions? Seeing none, thank you. Eric Stafford is our next conferee. Welcome, Eric, and it's Shahira, right?
It is. You did. Yeah, I was kind of looking. It's like, no, I think you got it right. Madam Chair and members of the committee, appreciate the opportunity to testify in support of Senate Bill 41 on behalf of our Kansas Retail Council. I don't know what happened. My paper copy of testimony here does not have a 50-state chart breakdown to Senator Holland's question. I have it on my PDF copy. So something happened when I was printing. I apologize, but I can resend this PDF to the full committee and to John as well, just to make sure I have the right version. But I do have a breakdown, and they vary. There's 27 states that have some sort of reimbursement, retailer reimbursement. But when you look at some of the states, some of them are $200 a quarter for small sellers only. There's some that are $10,000 a year max. Some are $1,500 a month max, $50 a month, $500 a month, $1,000 a month. So there's variation in how they treat this. But yeah, there are costs associated. I think the conferees before did a good job highlighting especially the impact on small businesses. I would point out some written testimony from a member of both the Kansas Chamber and NFIB from Corey Peterson, a small retailer in Lindsborg, Kansas, and just highlighting from a Kansas retailer perspective with 6 employees, the impact to his business and the costs associated with serving as the sales tax agent for the state. So happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Eric. Committee, any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. Committee, I'll draw your attention to a written testimony for the bill. Proponent Corey Peterson, Ann Smith Tate, and Randy Stuckey. Any other proponents? Seeing none, any opponents on the bill? Seeing none, we do have written neutral testimony. I would draw your attention to that, committee, because they do bring up a good, it's from Spencer Duncan, League of Municipalities. An issue is also, should part of that fee impact the local state tax collection also? So that is something that we should take a look at if we move forward on this bill. Any neutral testimony on the bill? Seeing none, we'll close the hearing on Senate Bill 41. Committee, thank you very much for your work today. I know we've got a heavy lift. We do have a full schedule for next week also. This committee doesn't let, we don't let any, I can't think of the right analogy right now, and after I said Martha Stewart, I'm done. So you guys, thank you very much for your work, and we'll see you next week, next Tuesday. Thank you.